associate at the Bridge Project, and I'm currently pursuing political science honors from Delhi University. And I am thrilled to be here and be a part of this enriching event. Being a student, this is particularly exciting for me, hearing all views and thoughts of individuals proficient in their respective fields. And I look forward to a very captivating discussion. Now, we would like to commence our second session, mainstreaming SDGs in research, teaching, and policy. I'm delighted to introduce our panelists for this session. Dr. Rajesh Tandon. Dr. Tandon is an internationally acclaimed leader and practitioner of participatory research and development. He is founder president of Participatory Research in Asia, a global center for participatory research and training since 1982. He is also co-chair of the UNESCO Chair on Community-Based Research and Social Responsibility in Higher Education since 2012. Professor N.V. Varghese. Professor Varghese is currently the Vice Chancellor of the National University of Educational Planning and Administration, New Delhi. Prior to this, he was the founding director of the Center for Policy Research in Higher Education, New Delhi. Dr. Sadika Halim. Dr. Halim is currently a professor of sociology, University of Dhaka, and is also the acting dean, Faculty of Social Sciences. She's also the director, Center for Advanced Research in Social Sciences, University of Dhaka. She holds the distinction of being the first female Information Commissioner of Bangladesh. Dr. Nischal Nath Pandey. Dr. Pandey is currently the director, Center for South Asian Studies, Kathmandu, Nepal. He's also the director, Consortium of South Asian Think Tanks, and was executive director, deputy executive director, and research and documentation officer of the Institute of Foreign Affairs under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Government of Nepal. Dr. Dhananjay Tripathi. Dr. Tripathi is a senior assistant professor, Department of International Relations, South Asian University. Prior to this, he was an associate research fellow at Center for Strategic Studies and Simulation of the United Services Institution of India and coordinator of the India chapter of South Asians for Human Rights. The moderator for this session is Carl Jason, co-founder of the Bridge Project. Over to you, Carl.
Thanks, Sugadhana. So I am facing a bit of technical issue at my end. So I'll probably start off the session without further ado, and I'll join on video. Hi everyone, and a warm welcome to our distinguished panel. I'm delighted to have all you join with us today. In the interest of the audience, I'd just like to briefly touch upon the agenda of this session. So there's a general lack of attention when we talk about the sustainable development goals in the spheres of teaching, education, and policy. So therefore, what does it take for universities, educators, researchers, and practitioners amongst our panel who we have, from this background? So how can they set things right in the space of higher education? And that's some of the conversations that we would like to get into today. And this discussion will be centered mainly around 4 layers. And the first is to do with research and education. So are we asking the sustainably relevant questions in our educational curriculum and through our research objectives? And can the SDGs be integrated with learning curriculums and research projects? The second, the layer, is teaching and employment. As we all know, India comprises of 1.8 billion strong youth who generally lack the requisite training to undertake what is called the jobs of the future. So what role can universities and researchers play in this regard? Number 3 is governance. So it's not just enough to apply the SDG framework to teaching, education, and research, but how do we model institutions and policy departments within SDG-oriented frameworks at all levels? So this deals with the issue of the design, governance, higher education and policy models. And the final layer is the implementation, vitally important as well. So what are some of the implementation challenges faced by various stakeholders in their quest to bring forward attention to the SDGs? So to help us address some of these pressing issues, from their own experience, we have a very distinguished panel. And I'd now like to invite to invite Dr. Tandon to make his presentation. So over to you, Dr. Tandon. Pratna, could you please share slides?
Thank you very much, Carl, and good afternoon to fellow panelists, Dr. Varghese, Dr. Salim, Dr. Pandey, and Dr. Dhananjay. It's a pleasure to be joining this conversation. And in the interest of time, I am going to basically highlight some of the issues and PowerPoint and its various documents enshrined and embedded in it can be used by the audience and the students for future reference. Um, Several points. First of all, Sustainable Development Goals, 17 of them, are universal. Unlike their predecessors, they are not relevant only for developing countries, southern countries, poor countries, etc. They are relevant for all 195 countries and jurisdictions in the world. And this is important to keep in mind. The second, you can move the slide. The second big issue about sustainable development goals is that the issues are identified, indicators are identified, but the means to get there are left to national plans. And each of our countries have developed national, in India, we have state level plans, and Niti Aayog has been championing that. But how do you address the question of prevention of um, maternal postnatal health issues in eastern tribal district in Jharkhand or in southern uh, district in Tamil Nadu? The issue is that unless you contextualize your knowledge solutions, you will not be able to produce a sustainable answer. Policy mandates at the national level, at the provincial level, are only enabling. So, the first important issue that confronts us is that higher education institutions must produce locally, contextually relevant knowledge solutions on whichever sustainable development goals are important. This implies that higher education institutions must partner with district level, provincial level institutions, other stakeholders, local leaders, community leaders, civil society, local business, local governance institutions like panchayats and municipalities in India. Therefore, without local partnership, even important locally appropriate research questions cannot be answered. The general theory and universal knowledge is available worldwide. It is the practical, implementable knowledge solutions that need to be produced for sustainable development goals to be contextualized locally. And this is where higher education institution can play a role. Next slide, please. Now, the biggest challenge for higher education institution to play this role in terms of sustainable development goals is to return to its curriculum. Much of the curriculum in many of our institutions of higher education has been drafted some years ago. Neither climate change issues, nor sustainable development issues, nor even the pandemic issues that we have been witnessing were necessarily the benchmark of the curriculum. Now, I have an engineering and management background, so let me give you an example. The civil engineering that was being taught to me 45 years ago at IIT Kanpur is the same civil engineering curriculum still being taught in many engineering colleges. Now, unless this curriculum is redesigned in light of the changed knowledge and understanding we have of use of material, etc., future generation of professionals, engineers will remain um, uh, awkwardly unaware. The second issue is that none of the sustainable development goals can actually be achieved independent of others. You take maternal health, water, nutrition, health services, status of women in family and community. All these have to be addressed. And in order for this to be addressed, our knowledge work must also be multidisciplinary. And this is where the disciplinary boundaries of teaching and research come in the way of producing appropriate solutions. Teaching and learning in a community engaged manner in the local context is the only way to also access local experiential knowledge, local practical knowledge, local indigenous knowledge, which, when integrated with some of the universal knowledge and some of the new science knowledge, then it can produce meaningful and sustainable solutions. Otherwise, technology implanted from outside doesn't grow roots on the ground. And the next point, if you can please move. So, therefore, the first challenge for higher education institutions is to look at the existing curriculum in all disciplines. And current tendency seems to be, let us add a course on environment science or let us add a course on SDG. That is helpful for information sharing, but not for producing new generation of professionals who are SDG inclined. Similarly, as I mentioned already, that co-creation of knowledge is a prerequisite for finding sustainable solution. Even the research questions to be asked have to be asked in partnership, because only then local solutions can be harnessed and local changes can be implemented. I think I've been working with the UGC for last 6 7 years in trying to address this question, that how can community engagement be within the framework of achieving sustainable development goals. And I'm happy to say that the National Education Policy 2020 begins to acknowledge that at the moment, though its implementation is far away. The final point I want to make is that the third World Conference on Higher Education of UNESCO has been announced. It is going to be held in Barcelona, October 7 to 9, 2021. And the second theme of that conference is higher education and SDGs. And I would like to think that it should be possible for South Asian educational institutions like those represented by several of you to put together a meaningful, practical, locally rooted set of recommendations to the World Conference on Higher Education and taking our own policymakers into account. But final point is really that making our students and faculty aware of the relevance of sustainable development goals and how it affects their own professional development is important. Let me stop here and we can return to that. Thank you very much, Carl.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tandon. I'll come back to you, and I think some very pertinent points which we can discuss over the course of this session. I'd now like to invite Dr. Halim to make her presentation. So, Pratna, if you could please share the slides uh, for Dr. Halim.
Okay, thank you so much. Very good afternoon from Bangladesh, University of Dhaka. I want to thank the young moderator, Ms. Shugandha, and also Carl for hosting this particular session. I also would like to say hello to all the distinguished panelists, mostly from India, and I feel very honored to be one of the panelists. As I was introduced, I basically teach sociology in the University of Dhaka for almost last 3 decades, and I'm currently Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences. Please move to next slide, please. And next slide. I think what we have heard, I'm not going to say something very new, but I will try to touch on the issues against the context of Bangladesh. And I think that my comments would be kind of matching with the other panelists too. As my previous speaker rightly pointed out, that 17 SDGs are universal, and Bangladesh is as well they're facing kind of big challenges in terms of addressing all 17 SDGs by 2030. And without 17 sustainable development goals, without meeting them, it would not be possible to recognize as a developed country in the world. It is quite inevitable, and we need to actually ensure, as the moderator rightly pointed out, that we need to address the inclusiveness and the equitable quality of education and promote lifelong learning by 2030. So this is very important, and the education goal, as we all know, that is 4 and has 7 targets about what is to be done and 3 means of implementation. The first target requires that all children complete free, inclusive, quality primary and secondary education by 2030. When I talk about Bangladesh, I not only talk about the mainstream people, but I also think about we need to take into consideration the indigenous communities, the Dalits, and the other coming from the other children coming from the very, very poorest of the poor section, and the challenge lies that how we bring them in. Target 2 is about providing early childhood development services and pre-primary education for all children, and also this put a lot of emphasis on the physical and educational facilities in terms of primary educational institutions. Next slide, please. This is where I would like to touch on that gender, how does the gender situation actually looks in Bangladesh. Gender disparity still exists in Bangladesh. If you look into the data, in terms of the primary education, girls enrollment is 50.68%, and whereas the boys are 49.32%. Dropout rates are high both in secondary schools and in higher secondary level college, and the challenges are that in most cases girls are dropping out, and the reasons behind are the cultural, religious causes, rampant violence against women, insecurity, parents get them married early, and child marriage is quite high in Bangladesh, and we stand 4th in terms of global ranking. And in terms of colleges, the situation of, if you look into the data of the situation of boys and girls, what we see that 33.43% boys and 41.52% girls study at schools in 2017, whereas 26.96% boys and 19.56% girls study in college at that year. So transition rate from primary to secondary school education is 95% almost. It is according to band-based data 2017. Gross enrollment rate in tertiary level education is 19.13% for the boys and 12.87% is for the girls. So number of university that we have in Bangladesh right now is 135, and out of which we have public university, and I teach in one of the largest public university, that is University of Dhaka. We have 46 public universities and private is 111. And if you look into the data, female student enrollment is approximately 33% in 111 universities, which is not that high. Please, next slide, please. So we look into the SDG target, and the target setting is fine, but to achieve those target is quite, I think, cumbersome exercise that our government, at the same time, the relevant stakeholders need to take into consideration. Target 7 is about the purpose of education, the why is rather than only what and how of education. So we are not putting that much of actually importance that why it is very important. We are looking into the remedies, but why, if we not go to the root causes, it will be difficult for us to implement. About 1.5 crore of children now in Bangladesh at age 6, and if they are grade 1 today, will be in grade 12, the final year of higher school in 2030. So we have to take them into consideration. The SDG 4 is to ensure the inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning for them by 2030. So what is the next slide, please? So the challenges are very important to look into. First, that we all know that we are into fourth industrial revolution. We would like to enter it successfully. So what we need, as my previous speaker rightly pointed out, that we need to actually coordinate among ourselves, the relevant stakeholders in the university level, college level, primary school level, and in the villages too. So because the organization and industries prefer or demand self-directed workers who can adapt and learn quickly. This is one of the biggest challenge. Another challenge is that the way we need to actually educate the students, that they should have a critical insight, communicate properly, innovative ideas, and also the university graduates, that we need to kind of make them creative and innovative skills and opportunities, and that will actually empower them to get proper jobs, the new kind of jobs. Such dispositions demand changes in curricular, teaching, and assessment methods to function young generation as active learners and creators. Higher education is therefore now about developing flexible, creative, and well-rounded individuals. Next slide, please. So subsequently, as a dean of the faculty, one of the largest faculty, I have 8,000 students in my faculty and 300 teachers. So what we are doing actually, we are revisiting our curriculum, and which requires extensive feedback, and so that we can kind of look into the strength and weakness of the curriculum and fit in with the SDG goals. So but we are also passing through this pandemic, so this is like that we have kind of shifted, and we all did actually, from my counterparts from India and Nepal would say the same thing, that now we have shifted classroom teaching from there to online teaching. Next slide, please. So higher education system in Bangladesh is quite relies on traditional method, and we encourage memorization, and learning is mainly classroom teaching, and I think it's quite common in most of the South Asian countries. Teaching is deeply teacher-centered. It should be student-centered. Teachers can create more interest among the students with the use of multimedia, interactive whiteboards, animation, and videos. These are the new things that we also need to train the teachers, the resource person. We need to have more capable and committed teachers. Traditional teachers pay a plan need to be changed, because during the pandemic, I experienced that many of my colleagues were reluctant to teach online. So they need to kind of given a new kind of trainings. And another thing we would like to introduce is that performance pay, also known as merit pay, plans attempt to tie teacher pay, at least in part, to their classroom performance. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, thank you. So many countries in Asia are transforming institutions as thinking schools. No, the previous slide, please. I have gone to the thank you one. Yes, thank you. So many countries actually in Asia are transforming institutions as thinking schools, and learning how to think reflectively, critically, and creatively, and employing these skills and techniques in the co-construction of a meaningful curriculum and associated activities. This is very, very much challenging those who are the academic leaders in the universities or in college or schools. This is, I think, a very important task that we need to take into consideration, because the success lies with of the SDG implementation with that. So with that note, I would end here, and I look forward to get questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Halim. That was a very informative presentation, and heartening to know that the University of Dhaka is taking sincere efforts in achieving some of these targets as we speak. I think we can begin with the panel discussion. So I'll quickly turn to Professor Verghese for my first question. And sir, just to start off from a very basic level, Pratna, can we have Professor Verghese on screen? Yeah. Yeah, so my question to you, sir, is how can universities promote and undertake research related to sustainable development? So, in terms of capacity building, curriculum design, what are some of your suggestions on this part?
Dr. Karl, thank you very much. My response to your question is that, if you're talking about research on sustainable development, I think we need to talk about three elements. One is economic growth, second one is environmental protection, and the third one is social equality. And Professor Tandon, Dr. Tandon very rightly pointed out that we need to change the curriculum and pedagogy. That was also reflected by Dr. Halim, Professor Halim, in her presentation. But what is happening is that very little research in these areas are done. One of the reasons I feel is that this is an area, SDGs is an area where you need mostly interdisciplinary research. That is not something that is promoted. Let me try to elaborate on this point for a minute. The point is that if you look into the references that are coming out in the publications, say for example in economics, you find that more than 80% of the references coming in the most reputed publications, and that some review has been done, I am talking about based on that review, we find that more than 80 to 85% of the references are from economic articles and books. Whereas in sociology and political science, you find that this share is less than that. But in other words, what I am saying is that one of the areas that needs to be improved is that interdisciplinary research focusing on economics, environmental sciences, and social equality or inequality. That is the area, if you ask me, that where we should focus on research, that is the area we should take research. If you come to the pedagogical dimensions, there is another issue. What is happening is that pedagogical research is a very underdeveloped area in most of the South Asian countries and certainly in India. You have arrangements for pedagogical research at the primary level that is carried out by SCRTs, etc. You have pedagogical research carried out by the universities in India, that is for the secondary level education. And for higher education, there is no institutional arrangement to carry on with pedagogical research. So when we talk about pedagogical changes, it is a non-starter in the real sense of the term. And unfortunately, what you find is that most of the research that is carried on school education, even the university departments of education are focusing their research and training on school education, not on higher education. So this creates a problem. Where do you do research? How do you promote research? And how do you promote or change the pedagogical dimension? That becomes very important. You find that India has, among the South Asian countries, India has the largest number of social science research institutions. And India established Indian Council for Social Science Research. It is estimated that nearly 70% of the research institutions in social sciences, empirical research carried out in social sciences in South Asia, is located in India. That is true. And this is led by economics. That's why I was talking about why economics is refusing to be interdisciplinary research, and which is creating a problem to understand sustainable development issues. Now, if you look into the research of the social sciences, what you find is that two dimensions. I feel that it is equality or inequality. That is the focus if you are talking about aligning our research with SDGs. That should be the focus, because today the rising inequality is polarizing the world, polarizing societies, and that has become, it is not growth alone. We are growing unequal. And the second slogan is assuming more importance than the first slogan, because except for the pandemic period, the growth rate or the growth in economics realm was much better, and reduction in poverty was much better. And what we find is that the unequal distribution and inequality has become one of the major sources. I'll end by saying that this inequality is accentuated by the issues of employment. Because in many countries, especially in the developing countries, and certainly in India, what we face is jobless growth. And from 2015 onwards, the data shows that it is not jobless growth, it is job loss growth. So we have moved from slow growth and slow employment to jobless growth to a situation of job loss growth. And this has a lot of implication for sustainability and keeping people away from poverty, and also a lot of implications for the equality or inequality dimension. So I think that the research should focus in this area. I hope I try to focus on the pedagogical dimension where the research should be, and specified on the areas of research that can be taken in social sciences and also in education. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot. I think it's very fascinating that you brought up the point about how there needs to be greater interdisciplinary research, and that's really something that stood out for me in your initial remarks. And that's a question I'll have later for one of our panelists. So I'll now turn to Dr. Pandey. Sir, talking about research in the policy sector. So Professor Varghese has very eloquently put this in the education space. But in the policy sector, and you are the director of the consortium of South Asian think tanks. So what are some of the examples of joint research collaborations between organizations that work on sustainability and environmental issues in Nepal, for instance, and also in the larger South Asian region?
Thank you very much for this kind invitation, distinguished panelists and the organizers. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'll also not repeat what has already been said by the distinguished panelists before me. But firstly, I'll just flag some of the points that have come to my mind. Number one, the pandemic will exacerbate the problem. Furthermore, world is far poorer today than it was before. Funding for least developed and landlocked countries like Nepal and Bhutan and others will be far reduced. There is already economic recession. We are talking about the GDP growth that has come down to 2.9% in 2020-21. Now, this will not be enough to sustain our economy and bring the poor people out of poverty. Labor-intensive services sectors are the hardest hit. Tourism has come to a virtual zero. And also this will impact almost all SDGs. Unemployment has soared. And on top of this, political instability has been brought up by our leaders, unfortunately, at this very time. So our society will not be able to afford political instability at the time of economic recession and at the time of the pandemic. I think this will impact almost all SDGs, but especially SDG 16, because peace, justice, and strong institutions have already been impacted by politicization. SDG 13 also, climate change, this is there, and gender equality, SDG 5. So let me just flag these points at the first. Secondly, a lot has already been said. Education is a force. It is a force to promote human rights, to eradicate poverty, to deepen sustainability. A lot of our institutions do teach SDG goals in their subjects. But then let me just flag out the subjects that are in place. Like, for instance, our own Madanjit Center for Development Studies and Regional Cooperation at the Kathmandu University. We have a subject on sustainable development, which the students at the bachelor's level will have to study SDGs. But these SDGs are not in other subjects like law, for instance, or in other subjects like economics. So it depends which subject we are talking about. It's already there in the Bachelors of Social Sciences, Bachelors of Development Studies, Masters of Political Science, but not gone into subjects of science, not gone into the subject of business administration. And let's say if you are a BBA graduate, then you will have not studied anything about SDGs when you come out of college. But if you have studied social sciences, then there is great likelihood that SDGs will be covered. Let me also talk about in some aspects about other institutions that we have in the region as part of South Asia Foundation. The UNESCO Madanjit Center for Development Studies, Regional Cooperation is in Kathmandu. We have one department at the Pondicherry University called UMISARC. There's a green energy department at the Pondicherry University. There is a Department of Engineering at Moratuwa University in Sri Lanka. And there is a Department of Law at the Dhaka law at Dhaka. I forgot the name of the university. And there is also Fine Arts Department at University of Beacon House National University in Lahore. So these are the institutions where SDGs are definitely taught. I think the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, and other specialized agencies of the United Nations also need to look into this aspect, that instead of supporting uh, major international conferences, perhaps they could support small colleges and universities to build their curricula so that SDGs can be really brought into the curriculum. I think it is also the duty of the United Nations specialized agencies also. Secondly, uh, as I mentioned, I'm the convener of Consortium of South Asian think tanks. It has one of the best and the most renowned think tanks of South Asia as members. It is supported by Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. The COSAT organizes regular conferences and seminars around the region. And in that, we have been, focusing on issues like migration, refugees, on environment, disaster management, which all come in one way or the other with the SDG goals. So therefore, I think there is a dire need to sensitize the researchers and research organizations in our region to give focus to the SDGs. But I think the larger issue here is that on climate change, a lot has been done. Climate change issues are in the curriculum of many of our subjects. uh, so I think we have to really chart out which area, which particular SDG we are talking about. If we talk about partnership for the goals, SDG 17, then very little is available on that particular area. But if you talk about SDG 5, gender equality, there is a whole gender studies that one has to study in master's level. There is also gender studies in bachelor's level. So these curricula will involve SDG goals. So let me conclude by the an optimistic note that uh, I think perhaps the regional cooperation organizations such as SARC, BIMSTEC, and if you look into the purview of BBIN, we can bring in SDGs there too. SARC has been focusing on SDGs. If you look at the various SARC summit declarations, there has been a lot of inclusion of SDG goals. We need to synchronize these efforts. We need to collaborate among ourselves, among the universities, faculties, think tanks of South Asia, and give impetus to this subject. So let me stop here, and I'll be very happy to answer questions. Thank you, Carl.
Thanks, Dr. Pandey. I think once again, I think you've really given us a good, well-rounded perspective from across the region, and I'd actually be delighted to maybe ask you a few more specific questions as we go. So I'll quickly ask Dr. Tripathi to maybe give us his perspective on a point which Professor Verghese had raised a while back on interdisciplinary research. Now, this is a point which has been often discussed within academic circles. But we have very specialized knowledge within our various departments. So, what would be your suggestion on rectifying this pressing problem, especially in our region?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. And I agree with some of the point raised by Dr. Pandey in his presentation. I think, and he is very right in his analysis when he said that within SDG, if you look at the goals that we are focusing and the goals that are not getting our enough attention, then there is this kind of mismatch. I think one of the solutions, if we really have to look at all the 17 goals, is to promote interdisciplinary research. And when I say interdisciplinary research, why it is so important, and even for SDG, it has a history. And the international community started discussing about some goals from 1992 onwards, and here Earth Summit of United Nations was a key mover in a way. Then we have Millennium Summit, and then MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, also set certain things for us to achieve, certain goals for us to achieve. And now we have moved to SDGs. I think there has been a link to what we are discussing right now, and it started something from 1992 onwards. I'm a teacher of international relations. I can also say that even on strategic issues, we started focusing on human security. And when we say human security, individual come into the focus of our discussion. So without getting into that, the question that you have raised, I think it's very, very important, because let me give you an example. If we are discussing about zero poverty, can we attain zero poverty without uh, gender gender equality? I think it's just not possible, because there are many reports which suggest that if a woman is not educated, if woman is not independent or strong enough, then there are problems in a family. So for that matter, let's look at the condition of Afghanistan, where we have seen that international community has poured a lot of money in last few decades post Taliban. But even there, even today, if you look at some of the data, and I would like to quote a UNICEF data that is there, a very latest one on Afghanistan, which says that 3.7 million children are out of school in Afghanistan, and in this, 60% are girls. So when we are discussing about the development of Afghanistan, can we afford to have an Afghanistan where 60% or more than half of the girls are out of the school? So these are something very, very concerning. So uh, when we are discussing about poverty, I think gender equality immediately comes into focus. When we are discussing about poverty, I think climate change immediately come into focus. Quality education immediately comes into focus when you are discussing about poverty, because if you have to remove poverty, how can you ignore quality education? So, and that means we cannot discuss any of these goals alone. We have to discuss it with other goals as well. So that open a prospect for interdisciplinary research, I think. And here the universities can play a very vital role. We have to promote, and let me tell you from my own experience that even we hesitate to get into interdisciplinary research. We have this conventional understanding that we will remain focused in our discipline. But if I'm talking of human security, how can I ignore climate change? How can I ignore the issue of nuclear non-proliferation? And if I have to discuss the nuclear issues, I have to discuss something with my colleague who is in the physics department. What all are important? How can we use nuclear energy for the development of people, not for the things that we know? So I think interdisciplinary research is very important if we have to attain SDGs. And universities has to play a very vital role. There is a need for universities to set certain goals within the university, that we have to promote interdisciplinary research. Right now, there is no focus on it. Although we say it theoretically, yes, we are. We always say that we are for it. But even at the South Asian University, students are free to take course in the different department, but very rare we don't see two faculty members coming together and offering a course. So I think that is very, very important. So I think, and I agree, as I said, that with Dr. Pandey, that all these goals are interlinked. You cannot discuss one uh, excluding others. And here, interdisciplinary research can really bring some focus on how to attain these goals and how all the goals are relevant.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, sir. Thanks a lot, and also for giving us the perspective from the YR, which is also expanding. I think, fortunately, to kind of integrate knowledge from other disciplines. So I think we are on the right track in terms of the discipline. But as you pointed out, the explicit focus on the SDGs are still not in the realm of our education systems and policy making. So with that, I'll just turn to Dr. Tandon, who had had made a very interesting point about the local community level participation. So my question to sir is, uh, what are the ways by which community and university engagement can be furthered now in the context of the pandemic, the disruption caused by the pandemic? How do you think this engagement between the community and the university can help further both learning and livelihoods at the same time?
Well, there are two first principles that I want to state. The first principle is that those of us who are inside the higher education institutions and who are professionally certified and trained by higher education institutions, we need to acknowledge that we are not the only source of knowledge, that knowledge resides outside. In fact, if you look at what happened during the pandemic, when English language instructions were being issued from New Delhi, local communities found local solutions. They found local solutions. For last 6, 7 years in India, we are talking about organic farming. Before 1960, all farming in India was organic. Then we brought in green revolution. In the name of green revolution, we destroyed water, soil, and food chain. The same thing happened to healthcare. Our Alma Ata Declaration of WHO in 1978 said primary healthcare means the responsibility is for preventive healthcare. And the pandemic response was only preventive. But we promoted a particular model of healthcare, which is you go to seek treatment for disease, not prevention and promotion of healthcare. And there existed, so many local grandmothers, family, herbal solutions for prevention. But that was delegitimized by our medical colleges, just as water harvesting technologies in many parts of this sub-region were delegitimized by hydrologists. And even today, in our plan to put water in every home, we are talking about putting a tap in every house instead of looking at harvesting water resources, but that requires local knowledge. So first we have to agree that knowledge resides in the communities, knowledge resides, our indigenous people, tribal people are epitome of knowledge about how to live in forests, how to look after wildlife, how to look after water resources. So you have to respect that. They don't need a PhD degree to be certified as knowledge producers. They have been producing and keeping knowledge for generations. Once you sort this out in your head and in your system, then you go to engage with them with humility. You go to learn as well as to teach. Partnership can only be mutually respectful when we listen to them. Now, under UGC, fostering social responsibility and community engagement is a policy which is now being implemented. We are going to start training 200 teachers to start this course, a compulsory 2 credit course from July. And part of the course entails listening to local knowledge and then jointly undertaking local research. Now, our our multidisciplinary research problematic that all of us have talked about has been talked about for at least 35 years, if not more, as long as I can remember. The question is why it doesn't happen. The question is that. And who will make it happen? SDGs cannot make it happen. Will funders make it happen? Those who finance research? Will they make a conditionality? In half a dozen countries in the world, including South Africa and Indonesia, there is research funding stream which says you must do research in partnership with local communities. And local communities should help you frame research questions. We don't have that model in India, perhaps not in South Asia, but many countries have. Likewise, funders insist on multi-stakeholder approach to research. European Union's program on Horizon 2020 is full of all that. And many people have benefited from this. Researchers have become oriented to look at society as a source of knowledge, not as a source of propaganda. And finally, I look to you guys, I look to the young generation, your students, your colleagues, your friends. If you don't demand that the curriculum be SDG sensitized, if you don't demand that multidisciplinary research happens, it won't happen. Where will demand come from? Supply follows demand. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Tandon. I think that was the highlight of our discussion so far, and your insistence and also passionate plea to the education systems in this region and also the policy making departments to integrate the SDGs and also to harness local knowledge, I think is very well taken. And I hope that this is applied in our context in the years to come. So I'd like to turn to Dr. Halim again and just to get her perspective on, again, local community participation in SDG engagement. So in the context of Dhaka University, you did mention that there were many initiatives that were taken on the front of gender equality and on research with the SDGs. So could you maybe share your experience on how the SDG framework can be inculcated in maybe the policy making departments of Bangladesh? And is there a consonance with the? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I do. I can hear you.
Yeah, yeah. Also,
Yes,
ma'am, I
I can
wanted
hear
to
you.
ask you: is there consonance in the policy making departments in Bangladesh and also the universities with regard to the SDG framework?
Oh, thank you so much. Actually, I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, and we have 16 departments under this faculty, like big departments like sociology, economics, political science. Then we have development studies, we have peace and conflict studies, women and gender studies, Japanese studies. So the SDG, the 17 goals actually cuts across all the departments, all the disciplines. And so there is not that much of problem in terms of bringing it in the SDG goals, because we have already dealt with the MDGs, and Bangladesh is quite done quite well in terms of achieving gender parity, particularly at the primary level. Though after fifth grade, the girl starts dropping off from the school, and I have already mentioned that the reasons behind why girl childs are dropping off from the schools, even from the colleges too. But the disparity in terms of the gender disparity is, we are addressing it quite. I must say, quite successfully. But the issue is that even though we are quite good in terms of achieving those goals, but the violence against young girls, particularly even the children, girl child, even the boy child, and the young women are quite high. Even it is quite high in India too, even though you have introduced the new law against rape, and Bangladesh also used, kind of implemented the death penalty. But even then that, we do not see that much of significant change. So I would rather put more emphasis that how to aware people in terms of the SDG goals. What we teach in the classrooms, it's fine, because in terms of theory, you can teach a lot of issues, but how do you practice it? How do you make your students, when they graduate and they become police officers, magistrates, or the land officers, or admin officers, or in economic or custom cadres, how do they practice it so that it goes to their, it has to go reach their mindset. You need to bring a lot of changes in the mindset. And that what I see as a teacher in a faculty, and I've been teaching for almost last 3 decades, what I see that more and more students are into Googles and like cut and paste world, not picking up any books. So we are so much dependent on the IT things. There is no wrong in it, but how do you balance it? When you talk about, when my previous speaker, he rightly mentioned about that there is no dearth of knowledge. Indigenous people have knowledge, the elderly generation have knowledge, but do we take those knowledge into account, and how we are going to do it? If you look into the forestry projects in Bangladesh, we are not actually regenerating the natural forest. What we are doing, rather, we are doing afforestation. We are going for plantation, quick growing trees. That kind of trees are being planted. That's what I look into when I did my PhD in the plain land in Bangladesh. And also I work in the Chittagong hill tracts. What I see that more and more the indigenous people are getting pushed into the hills, and their lands have been encroached by the Bengali settlers. So what about SDGs? That when you talk about inclusive development, when you talk about justice, this is where you need to focus that how you address the discriminatory policies and the attitude of the even the government officials. Most of the time it's very, very feudalistic. So the interdisciplinary research, I put a lot of emphasis on it, and I congratulate my university because the new policy the vice chancellor of this particular university and the administration have taken up, that to provide funding to the teachers to do interdisciplinary research, that we can kind of connect social issues with the economic and environmental science, and at the same time touch on the four pillars of the SDGs, like economy, society, environment, and gender inequality. So this is what the University of Dhaka is doing. Not only University of Dhaka, other universities also addressing SDG this way. Thank you so much.
No, I think that's quite wonderful to hear, and maybe even best practices in Bangladesh can be maybe taken up in the rest of the South Asian countries. So we maybe look forward to collaborations on that front in the future,
Yes.
say between universities in our region with Bangladesh. So I'd like to turn back to Professor Verghese, and sir, you've also been a proponent of uh, teaching curriculums, in updating the teacher training models. So my question really is in the realm of the ESDG, which is the Education for Sustainable Development Goal. So this approach actually seeks to blend higher education learning with the environmental and social justice goals. So how has this approach evolved from the perspective of teaching at the level of tertiary education? So your views on that, sir? Sir, I think you're on mute. Could you unmute yourself, please?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Can you hear? Thank you very much. This also is centered around the research process. What is happening in most of the cases is that you are trained on the basis of a disciplinary boundary. You can cross that disciplinary boundary, whether for teaching or research, either when you realize the limitations of that boundary, or you start with a multidisciplinary boundary. So in India and in many developing countries, including some of the developed countries, the basic problem is that the departmentalism, if I can use a word, is the biggest constraint for developing either a curriculum or a pedagogical dimension in an interdisciplinary way. And that acts as a major constraint for issues like sustainable development goals, which cannot be captured or which are not amenable for any single monodiscipline. And that's a challenge. And why this challenge? Unless you have some research and produce some evidences and get this translated in terms of curriculum development, you have nothing to choose, or they have nothing to talk. And that link is not taking place because we are talking about an empty box. Relatively, empty box may be a hard word to use, but relatively an empty box. So I try to see that why multidisciplinary research is not taking place. And as Professor Dr. Tandon pointed out, why there is no link between, we had discussions earlier also with Dr. Tandon, why universities are delinked basically from the community where they are operating. I think the individual aspirations conflict with my interest in interacting with the local communities. A professor feels more comfortable, and if I can use more elite, sorry for using a wrong word, when I get a publication in an international journal, when I sit with the hardcore people who are luminaries in the hardcore theory of the subject, when I try to do something related to the local area, responsibility of the university to the local area, linking university activities to the local area, in the hierarchy of status, I'm talking about the academic status, I'm not talking about the caste status. In the hierarchy of academic status, you find that I lose. I may be intelligent as much intelligent as the other person. So therefore, unless we induce substantial rigor in the research with the local communities and local areas, we will not be able to encourage, because my promotion is based on, or my invitation to an international conference is based on how many publications I have in the international journal, whether I should be invited in economics, sociology, history, or political science, etc. So I keep my identity, my academic identity. And what is happening is that many a time interdisciplinary, this I am telling you after field work, having detailed discussions with many places, not only in India, in both in Africa and Asian countries, and saying that, so my basic academic identity is being eroded or questioned when I try to get into the multidisciplinary field, and therefore to protect my identity, it is very
You have to
important.
stay within. You have to stay within that disciplinarity.
And let me use a word. There is something called a tragedy of commons. This is a term that is being used. So unless one has the capacity to see beyond yourself, like the tragedy, otherwise we are trapped in the tragedy of commons. My feeling is that academicians are trapped in the tragedy of commons. Unless we are in a position to get out of this, this threat, out of this net, we will not be in a position to promote interdisciplinary research as a common element in the universities. Then we will not be able to develop good curriculum that you can say that it is interdisciplinary in nature, which focuses on SDGs. Then only we can talk about pedagogy. Because when you're talking at university, I teach at the MPhil level and doctoral students. But teaching at the MPhil and doctoral students is not just to go into the library and taking 2 books and talking about it. I should have deeper understanding about that. But if you want to develop that deeper understanding, I should also have some empirical analysis. I should also have some research methodology strongly rooted. So that goes against, this is my hypothesis, that goes against this. And therefore, I will say that the tragedy of commons in academics acts against going beyond your discipline. And that creates a big problem for issues like SDGs, which should be approached not from a monodisciplinary background, from a multidisciplinary background. This is my take on this.
Sure, sir. No, I think I quite agree with you, and I'm sure our listeners would also take a lot of the essence of that you said, to also look within and to try and understand what is your purpose in the research that you do. And I think that's a very relevant point that you touched upon. So if I could come back to Dr. Pandey, we've also touched the 1 hour mark. Yeah, we'll try to wrap up the discussion and move on to the Q&A. So I'd like to invite Dr. Pandey again to maybe give us his perspective. I mean, you were the former advisor of the National Planning Commission for the tourism sector in Nepal. So how can research think tanks and higher education institutes serve as incubators of green initiatives? And are there maybe some initiatives done in the tourism side of Nepal that you feel can achieve greater salience amongst other countries in the region?
Well, the 2 things that I wanted to highlight are the SDGs 16 and 17. These are very important, and this itself can be the main fulcrums of interdisciplinary research. Peace, justice, and strong institutions. When we talk about that, you go into various areas, and when you talk about partnership for the goals, you go into Department of Political Science, Department of Economics, law, international relations, strategic studies, environmental studies, Department of even engineering. You even go into Department of Public Health. So I think for universities, we can only focus on 16 and 17 and go for interdisciplinary research. That's what I have been telling the universities that I am attached to, that let us do some kind of a brainstorming on 16 and 17. Then we can really bring about interdisciplinary research and dissemination of information, publications, joint publications of various departments. And that itself, the UNDP can support. We have been dealing with the UNDP here in Kathmandu as well. To your specific question on tourism sector, we have a program called Village Tourism. And village tourism is a concept that tourists go to a certain village. They stay in the private houses of the villagers. The villagers also get earnings. They just live the life the way the villagers have been living. Village tourism. So that has been very successful in certain areas, but not always, because for that you need to go out of the city. You need to go out of Kathmandu Valley. You need to go to Pokhara, perhaps even further up to the villages, the Gurung village or a Rai village, and then stay for 4 or 5 days. The tourists really enjoy. But now the challenge is the tourism sector has come down, the because of the pandemic, and we are not sure when this will see an upsurge again. And right now the problem is that Kathmandu city may be seeing some Indian tourists, but then to retain them into the country is also a challenge, because 3 or 4 days maximum and then they go out. So there are a lot of challenges due to the pandemic. I think all SDGs are affected, as I mentioned during the course of my presentation. But I think the specialized agencies also need to completely overhaul their programs and approaches to the SDGs.
No, absolutely. I
Thank
think at the end of the day, the mentality change needs to come, and which is already happening at the bottoms up. So maybe if there is greater salience for some of these ideas at the higher levels of governance and implementation, I think we would be on track. But also heartening to know that the SDGs are being seriously looked at, in a country like Nepal, from whom we have a lot to learn in terms of their tourism and conservation, heritage projects, etc. So that's quite fascinating to hear from you, Dr. Pandey. So I'll move on to Dr. Tripathi. Before we begin with a Q&A, we have a stream of questions that we have received. So I'd like to cover those in our next segment. So Dr. Tripathi, if you could just let us know what is mission of a university. So for instance, uh, the university as a public actor has connections to other stakeholders in society. So what is your take on some of the innovative and constructive ways by which universities can engage in public discourse? So you spoke about how universities can internally maybe run initiatives related to the SDGs, but what is its public responsibility on this front?
I think a couple of initiatives that a university can take, and a lot has already been said by Dr. Tandon. I think we need to connect with the communities, local communities, and their knowledge is also very valuable. So, can we learn from them? Can we put them in our classrooms, in our discussions? Can we engage more with them? That is one part of it. The second, I think there is a lot of things has been said on a very disconnect between schools and universities. Schools are the first learning places for all the students. So what sort of interaction they are into in, what sort of education they are into in, I think the universities should also try to engage with schools. The faculty members of university should engage with the faculty members of schools to know how students are being groomed and what are the lessons that they are getting. I think that is also very important. A connect with the community, with the schools. At the third level, I feel that the university, and this is a university in a very conventional sense, particularly in South Asia, we are very hesitant in collaborations. We don't really very open for collaborations. I think a very excellent example of this is like the South Asian University IR department and Bridge project has collaborated, and this is one of the very excellent outcome that are in front of us. I think this hesitation should go. It's not about the conventional disciplinary thing that we are always look at, and we hesitate to collaborate with faculty members, with our colleagues in the other department. But there's a lot of hesitation in terms of collaborating with non-state actors, in collaborating with NGOs, in collaborating with activists, those who have a lot of knowledge from the grassroots. I think this has to go. As Professor Varghese was saying, that we feel more happy sitting among our own peers, and if I would be happy in a company of professors from IR department in different parts of the world. I think that has to go, and this is very true for South Asia. There is a lot of problem in terms of funding also, from where we should take fund, whom we should invite for a special lectures. I think there's a lot where universities need a change, and I think this pandemic has taught us at least a couple of excellent lessons. One, that uh, online thing. I think this has taught us, like, we can collaborate with anyone in the world. We can invite anyone in the world in for our classroom lectures. So that was something missing. Earlier, we used to think about a lot of logistic funding, other things. Now this is we have learned that it is possible. I can invite a professor from New York to deliver a lecture. I can invite somebody who is working in a grassroots, let's say in South Africa, on a climate change issue, to deliver a lecture in my university. So that is one. I think the funding, the money part, is not that relevant in this era, the digital era, that has we have learned from here. The second is, let's get out of our shells, and let's collaborate with more grassroots people. Let's collaborate with more NGOs and think tanks, those who work on specific issues. I think the universities has to learn this. It's the problem, I feel, as, and I like to reiterate that it is not about our shyness in terms of interdisciplinary research. It is also our hesitation to collaborate with
Yeah.
with other important actors of the society. And sometimes the problem is that the consequence of this is sometimes we remain more theoretical and
Hmm.
less empirical in our understanding, in our approach, and sometimes we don't understand the society. And that is why there is a lot of critique on universities also, that
Hmm.
you people talk something which is not relevant for the society. I think this is the time for us to change, and that is also going to help the way research is being done on SDGs.
Hmm.
Thus,
No, absolutely, Dr. Tripathi. I think, as you rightly pointed out, data or empirical research is plenty in this region, right? But we don't see a lot of, say, focus with interdisciplinary research and how to harness that data, for instance, and especially when we talk about the SDGs. So with that, I'd now like to move into the Q&A segment. So I will direct the question to one of our panelists. Uh, and yeah, if you could keep your remarks brief, since we are now running short on time. So can I have the first question on screen? Okay, so we have this question from Kushal Gupta, True Value Consulting. So his question is, what would you recommend for civil engineers in India to bridge the industry academia gap, I would assume, for the SDG sector? Would Dr. Tandon like to take on this question, sir?
Thank you, Carl. Let me give you an example. 5 years ago in India, we launched Swachh Bharat Mission to provide toilet and related infrastructure to every household in the country. Now, I conducted a workshop with engineers, law, public administration, and sociologists in University of Raipur 4 years ago. And I asked them what can they study to ensure effective implementation of this Swachh Bharat mission. And the initial tendency was that they would go in their disciplinary boundary. Professor Varghese has explained it beautifully. And and I said, no, 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 you are not going in disciplinary bound. We are going to make teams of all of you. So one engineer, one public admin, one sociologist, one whoever, and you go. And I sent them into nearby. Uh, One went to slums, urban slums, and one went to a nearby village, not even far away from city of Raipur. And then they came back. They presented. It was a 2 3 day workshop. Fascinating. Uh, they at least began to look at the problem in a holistic manner. So the engineer said that this is the first time anybody told me that there is something called a panchayat, and that panchayat gives some guidelines and some infrastructure support. And if I as an engineer, go and design a system without panchayat's readiness, it won't work. The public administration fellow said, I didn't realize that the standard toilet seat that has been recommended would not work in those very narrow lanes of the slums. And it has to be adapted. But he said, as a public administrator, I was told government policy, you go push, push, push without contextual meaning. So, is it possible, therefore, is it possible that civil engineers and public administration students and sociologists and law professionals, and there was a law issue also because it was crossing somebody else's land, and he said you can't put the pipeline through the the water going out of the toilet through my land. It will spoil my crops, and so there was legal hassle around that. So if you go there and do this kind of a work, then you develop understanding of the real world, where once you graduate as civil engineer, you'll have to go and work. You may go and work for Larsen Toubro, doesn't matter. But Larsen Toubro will put you on the job on some soil somewhere. Huh? You won't stay in the air to work on ground, no. So when you land on that soil, might as well get oriented to that soil while you are a student. Otherwise, you will waste 5 years of your professional time learning that which you could have learned earlier. So, in this way, learning can become an integral part of professional education, and you acquire holistic knowledge. It is not at the cost of your domain expertise, but domain knowledge has to be applied. The other example is not for civil engineers, but for electronics engineers. My first degree, you can create any number of tech apps you like, but without understanding of the sociology and the politics and the culture of that context, I don't know how many times you have sat in Uber in Bihar or Uber in Tamil Nadu, where the driver does not understand any English, but the Uber app only gives instructions, guidance in English language, and that too in an accent that is not Desi English. What is the point? Many a times I've sat in the Uber and explained to the driver, "Bhai, ye kehta hai left turn karo, left." Oh, sir, left. Oh, I see. And we are happy. We are happy. We're producing now. People in grade 1 are producing apps. Very soon, pregnant women, the uterus will produce apps. Of no use. Of no use. So please, contextual understanding. Your domain expertise will have to be applied to some context. Some context. About 45 years ago, there was a book called Subjective Side of Science, and it was a study of NASA scientists and how their personal interests, biases came into play. And we believe science is neutral. Now, what has happened to design of the algorithms where gender biases and caste biases have come in?
Racial biases,
Yeah, in AI applications. So, if I am doing the coding, it's whole of me doing coding. My head, my heart, my hand, my value system, everything does coding. Same thing with language. When the internet came first, when we were conducting these programs for internet in the communities, and you said surfing. Now, why surfing is used? Hawabaji क्यों नहीं बोला जाता? Surfing, because those fellows who designed it were doing surfing in Silicon Valley off the coast of San Francisco. Surfing. As if the concept is surfing. No, label is surfing. And it has to be contextualized.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for being candid on that point. It's very rare to find this kind of honesty in public forum discussions. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Tandon. Maybe we have time to take two more questions if time permits. So, but I would request the remarks to be short if possible. So, can we have the next question on display? Okay, so this question is from Latiful Alam Khan, who's at the Center for Human and Environment Studies. And his question is, how many qualitative and quantitative institutions are being built in institutions within South Asian region? So if I were to understand his question correctly, his question is if are we getting straitjacketed by terming certain institutions as qualitative and the others as quantitative without really bringing or connecting a bridge in how we do our research and policy. So maybe if Dr. Professor Verghese, if you would like to take on this question, sir.
Qualitative, talking about qualitative research and quantitative research, I understand. So I don't know what exactly qualitative institution, I do not know. Quality of an institution or institutional quality, I can understand. But qualitative institution means what? I do not know. And quantitative institution means what? I'm not sure about it. If it is on research, certainly there is a lot of value for doing both qualitative and quantitative research. But I'm not a person. I am trained in economics, econometrics, mathematical economics, and advanced statistics. And you have used all types of hierarchical linear models and empirical studies. But I'm not a person, although quantitatively very comfortable, I'm not a person who promotes quantitative research independent of qualitative research. Many things that I have learned, the intricacies of the social dynamics and the interaction process that takes place cannot be captured through a quantitative or a survey method. That needs focused group discussion, that needs interviews. But at the same time, the problem is that if you want to talk about rigor and the value of findings or generalizability of a finding that you are generating, the evidence that you are generating, then you also need quantitative, because you cannot talk based on one institutional study or two institutional study, two schools, etc. You need a large one. So therefore, I do not want to make a distinction between this qualitative and quantitative research. These are two different types of research. One of the major problems I was focusing earlier, when economics, more than 80% of the references or 85% of the references are only for economic articles. Whereas if you go to political science, this percentage is only around 60%. And if you go to sociology, this percentage is 50%. Why I was making this point is essentially because the quantitative people have a feeling that they are superior to qualitative people, and perhaps those who are following qualitative research, perhaps if I can use a wrong word for a right reason, so an arrogance, an academic arrogance that they carry along with them. I'm talking about my own colleagues, including me. So there is an arrogance, academic arrogance that they carry, and they try to look down upon qualitative research.
Sure.
And this is also related to when you're talking about interacting with the local people, you go and sit down, have interviews and focus group discussions, etc., which are not considered to be rigorous enough to be considered as a rigorous research. So that is also one of the issues that we consider. And moreover, in the universities in India, mostly it is a positive research. That means you have a hypothesis. And then you go to an empirical evidence. It's a hypothesis testing. And a qualitative research does not permit hypothesis testing. So it is more of a hypothesis generation. So these are two different ways of looking at, So let me end by saying that qualitative research is important, quantitative research is important. But in my personal view, I do not. This is what I did in my center when I was a founding director and developing that. I do not accept this view that, the quantitative should be in a separate compartment and qualitative should be in another compartment. And I strongly believe that the social dynamics cannot be captured by the survey method and quantitative analysis. That needs quality.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Professor Verghese, for shedding light on that particular question.
You want me to take the next one? Ranking?
Do you have the question in front of you? Yeah, can we have the next question? Maybe we can get a quick response from your side, sir, and also Dr. Tripathi and Dr. Haller. You're also free to maybe give your quick responses to the question on screen. Yeah, after you, sir.
To me?
Yeah, Professor Vargas, yeah, you may.
Okay. I don't want to monopolize the discussion. That's why I asked you. No, but my point is that of many of the indicators that are used, take into account. Say, for example, there is an indicator of diversity that is taken into account in the rankings. That indirectly reflects the social exclusion issues, etc. But let me also say that I don't consider ranking is the right method to make an assessment about higher education institutions. If there are 22,000 universities in the world, not more than 1,100 universities are included in the ranking. So how do you talk about improving quality of higher education with taking into account only 5% or 10% of the institutions in the country? And if you take NIRF ranking, if you have more than 40,000 colleges and more than 1,000 universities in the country, it also covers only 1,000 or 1,200 institutions. So ranking is a good market processes to make profits, to attract students, to get high fees, but it is not a solution to get into these issues related to improving quality of higher education. This is my belief. Why I'm making this point is also because of the reason that, you see, what is a world-class university? How do you characterize a world-class university? There are 4 characteristics of a world-class university. The best students, the best teachers, abundance of resources, and full autonomy. And no institution has this facility. If you have all these facilities, you are already world-class. You do not become third class. So you become world-class. So in India, the option is between third class and world-class, universities that you are talking about, And unfortunately, Indian students are highly respected. They do very well when they go abroad. Indian professors are highly respected. They do very well. But when it comes to Indian institutions, nobody wants to respect Indian institutions except a very few. And one characteristics of the Asian region, one characteristics of the Asian region is that we do not appear anywhere in the world rankings of universities. The top ranking university globally from Asia is Peking University, which is number 22. So China has the top ranking institution, the top ranking is Peking University 22. But neither India, nor Bangladesh, nor Pakistan, nor Sri Lanka, institutions do not come anywhere close to that, We are quarreling for one university in the first 200, one university or 2 universities in the 500, etc. So that is the way we are trying to look at it. Thank you.
Look at it, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Professor Vargas. And I think we need to look beyond these rankings and numbers at some point. And the question really encourages, factoring in the SDGs in some of the parameter, in the rankings parameters. So, Dr. Halim, Dr. Tripathi, in case you have any quick remarks to make, you may kindly do so, and we can conclude the session. Yeah, Dr. Tripathi, would you like to go first?
No, nothing from my side, Carl. Thank you.
Sure. Dr. Halim? Okay, I think Dr.
Halim is not there.
Sure. No problem. I think she did mention that she has a prior commitment. Not a problem. So I'd like to thank Professor Vargas, Dr. Tripathi, Dr. Tandon, Dr. Halim, and also Dr. Pandey for joining us today in this second session on mainstreaming SDGs. So Pratna, if you could add all of them on screen. Yes, thank you so much. Thanks a lot for joining us today, sir. It was a real pleasure, and we hope to connect with you all in the future in case we plan to do an event of this scale. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Sugandha, you can take over. Thanks.
Thank you to all the panelists for those fascinating insights. There were so many key takeaways from this session, and it was a delight to have you all join us today. Please stay tuned for session 3 that will commence 4 p.m. onwards.